Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Rene Velasquez. I'm managing partner at Valitaire, and it's a pleasure to have the distinguished opportunity here to welcome you all to the Malaysian Carbon Market Forum, and it's a pleasure to open this year's discussions with such a distinguished panel. As per the introductions, we've got some very learned and experienced people here to provide their opinions. And we have a huge responsibility really to set the bar for the conference, to frame the big questions that will echo through every session here that shall follow. Now, for some context, in 2025, we've experienced record heat and extreme weather as well as political turbulence. And yet carbon markets continue to evolve as the connective tissue between policy, finance, and climate ambition. Today, we will explore three core themes within this topic. We'll dive firstly into Article 6 and uncover essentially from promise through to practice. And then we will focus on something that's core to our market, which is integrity, which is the currency of trust and the foundation of market infrastructure. And then we will essentially lead into the remaining conversations for the morning, which is talking about regional leadership and how ASEAN and Malaysia in particular can model collaboration and credibility. Now, these are really important questions, and I hope that you will keep them all in mind right through to the conclusion of the conference, because the answers will determine whether carbon markets can deliver what they promise, which is real impact at scale, delivering with utmost integrity. So, that is the introduction. Now let me introduce my panelists and head straight into the conversation. Good. Can you guys hear me okay with this mic? Great, thank you. Okay, so maybe we can dive in. Bjorn, maybe I'll start with you, if just going from left to right. And hi, Perimal, thank you for joining us as well, virtually. Are you in Bonn, by the way, Perimal?
Yeah, I'm in Bonn.
Okay, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning for you, so appreciate it. But let's begin with Bjorn, and then we'll head into the rest of the conversation. Bjorn, in terms of scene setting under Article 6, with this sort of hierarchy from promise to practice, could you help us just sort of define really how Article 6 is moving effectively from negotiation rooms, and we'll hear from Perimal in a minute in terms of some updates there, towards national implementation? You represent at IETA, the International Emissions Trading Association, the voice of a lot of the industry, right? And we'd love to hear from your perspective how these emerging ITMO frameworks and registries are shaping global market confidence and what still stands in the way of real liquidity in the market.
Sure, thanks Rene, and terima kasih, selamat pagi everyone. Thank you again also to Bursa Malaysia for hosting us here for the third time. And a special shout out to Dr. Waini and the team. As AITA, we are very happy and excited to collaborate as a supporting partner for the third time. And I think we are among friends, but we are among friends who are willing to disagree with each other. And I think this is very important because many of us here in the room are looking at the same objectives, but we need to disagree and find ways of moving ahead with the market on several key pieces, because we are in a critical transition of this market. And I think everyone agrees that we are now in a new era of carbon markets under the Paris Agreement, with Article 6 being finally concluded in negotiations and now moving towards implementation. And I think what this means is really three key things. Number one is that we know countries now need to account for the carbon credits in their registries and their contribution to the NDCs. This means there's also a cost component that needs to be assigned to each unit that is authorized and transacted outside the country. And this is fundamentally a new regime, which means that governments across the world, not just in this region, but all over the world, are struggling in defining their national regulations and frameworks, setting up their accounting and reporting infrastructure, and I'm sure Perumal will speak more about that, and also how the share of proceeds or the funds that are coming through carbon credits benefit both the government, the product developers, the private sector, and also the local communities and indigenous peoples that are involved in the implementation of projects. The second piece is around integrity. So we know that to scale this market, we need trust and we need integrity. And I will let both Amy from ICVCM and then also Perumal speak about what this means in terms of the core carbon principles and under Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement and a new crediting mechanism. And finally, and the third piece, I think for me, is digitalization. And it kind of sounds like an old term. So saying digitalization in 2025 in the age of AI, it sounds like we're speaking 20 years back. But unfortunately, I think the carbon market is maybe 10 years back, at least in terms of our infrastructure, the plumbing that creates this market. And maybe I'll let Gemma speak more about this. But we need to really upgrade this to the new era, to lower transaction cost, to lower cost in project development, to lower the barriers of entry in this market, and then to scale this up. Because I believe what the minister highlighted before is that it's still small in scale and fragmented in structure. And what we are moving now towards with ICVCM and with also Article 6 is towards a more coherent and connected market. And ultimately, you ask, what are the barriers that are hindering this? I think number one at this point is host country frameworks. And that's why it's so important to have the conversation here today. In Malaysia, we had a dialogue with NRES yesterday, and we look forward to continue supporting and working on this together.
Great. Bjorn, thank you for that scene setting and that context. Let's pick up this sort of transition. And Gemma, I'll now lead to you coming from Bjorn's intervention here, talking about the infrastructure piece. Let's pick that up and then let's go towards and continuing the narrative. But so from your perspective, Gemma, just the World Bank has been really at the heart of helping countries to prepare for Article 6. And from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest challenges in translating that Article 6 from text to practice effectively, and especially for countries in the global south, to bring it to the context here? Can you give us some examples around the capacity building and support for underway to address these gaps, essentially?
Thank you so much, Rene, and thank you again, Bursa Malaysia, for the kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So when we talk about translating Article 6 text into practice, we see at the World Bank working with countries two key challenges. The first one was mentioned by Mr. Acting Minister in his keynote, developing legal and regulatory frameworks. It's very important because this framework will tell us how trading occurs, who owns emission reductions, what are the rights and obligations attached to carbon credits, how the authorizations are granted. So this is where we see countries still putting this in development and defining it. And in here, the World Bank is providing capacity building with gaps and needs assessment, diagnostic tools, off-the-shelf templates to guide countries in putting this together. And very recently, together with BCMI, ICBCM, GIZ, Article 6 Implementation Partnership, and UNFCCC, we launched a guidebook in July. So I really encourage all of you to check it out. It's called Navigating Decisions. And it structures 7 questions around how to establish the national and policy framework for carbon markets for countries. So that's the first trend or challenge that I would like to highlight. The second one is the readiness of market infrastructure for countries. When we say market infrastructure, what do we mean? We're talking about key digital building blocks that enable us to operationalize the market. National greenhouse gas inventories, digital MRV systems that help us verify and monitor and report, carbon registries. Carbon registries are the ledger, the heart of implementation. It's where we can do robust accounting, where we can reconcile data, where we can report, and last but not least, trading platforms, marketplaces, exchanges. And on the cross-cutting, we have data layers, aggregating platforms that put all this data together. So this infrastructure needs to be put in place, and countries are still developing and designing this. And at the World Bank, we provide very hands-on trainings, and some of you have been part of it, leveraging platforms, simulating environments, how a registry works, how do you upload data, how do you map data, as well as global guidance around information security, transaction integrity, and so on. But connecting these two challenges to one additional barrier is, do you have the implementation capacity Because if you have the policy in place, the paper in place, and you have a database in place, that's not enough, right? We need the implementation to put this in practice. And we've seen, to your question, Renee, as well, the challenges is sometimes this is often delayed in countries because there's shifting of institutional roles, maybe lacking coordination across ministries, and this delays projects and potentially can affect the uncertainty for investors. So these are the key challenges and trends that we see, and one key message to countries is take an approach of learning by doing. Article 6 implementation, it's the process. Perfection is not the starting point, and we've seen countries taking a very effective approach by just testing a procedure, piloting your transaction, redefine your institutional along the way. So that's what I would add here. Mm-hmm.
Great. So what I'm hearing essentially is, as we see this increase in ambition, the infrastructure is the connective tissue effectively, that effectively underpins. Like I think you used the term plumbing. I quite like that in terms of the infrastructure. So I'll take that as a pivot effectively. So Parimal, I'll go to you, and again, appreciate you staying up till 3 a.m. to take this panel. From the supervisory body's perspective and at the UNFCCC where you sit in terms of this vantage point, how do you see the party readiness evolving, and what are the milestones or decisions that are most critical between now and COP30 to ensure the Article 6.4 mechanisms deliver on their promise and environmental integrity?
Thanks, Renee, and I hope I'm audible. It's quite early in the morning, so it's a bit screechy voice. Thanks, Bursa Malaysia, as well, for the invitation, and apologies for not being in person with just 3 weeks to go to COP. In terms of the implementation of Article 6, I think as Bjorn said, that all the necessary elements that are needed to operationalize Article 6 has been completed over the last 9 years. Now we are fully in an implementation mode, wherein I think one of the key elements that is needed, which we hopefully to get it, is the first set of standards that will be adopted by the supervisory body addressing one of the major sectors, which is the waste sector. And its associated tools are expected to be adopted by the end of this month, possibly when the supervisory body would be meeting virtually. So I see that as one of the key elements that is expected to happen before COP. In terms of the readiness of the countries, one of the things that in order for you to participate in Article 6, one of the essential element is to submission of the host party participation requirements. One of such is to identify what kind of activities and sectors and projects that you would approve to engage under Article 6.4. And we see that as one of the guiding lights towards the international cooperation, because that's where the investors and the interested parties would know that where the country is focusing on and where does the investments happen in a particular sector. So the countries, as we speak today, even though to participate in Article 6.4, you need more than, we have more than 110 designated national authorities across the globe. But unfortunately, we have only 25 plus countries that have submitted those participation forms. So we as a secretariat, along with our regional collaboration centers, we have 6 across the world. So we are trying to make sure that the countries do make these forms available. We have a pipeline now where the interest of Article 6.4 has been specified by more than 1,000 plus projects coming across 95 countries. So we are looking at the type of activities countries are looking, and project participants or activity participants are looking to engage. So I would see one of the bottlenecks time being is the availability of those standards. Even though we have the foundational standards that have been developed by Baku, by SBM 14 last year, we have both the methodological as well as the removal standard. So nothing prohibits from anybody submitting new methodologies. The focus of the supervisory body would be to develop more standards to facilitate implementation of the activities. So that's where I would see. And the main bottleneck, I think it's not an unknown, which is what to authorize, when to authorize, and how much to authorize. And while at the same time, countries are also developing their NDC 3.0, and they have to look at their long-term low-emission development strategies in making sure that what needs to be approved in order to participate in the mechanism. I would also take a couple of minutes in terms of where the more action currently happening is the bilateral cooperation or sometimes unilateral cooperation towards certain demand centers.
Parimal, can I interject just for a quick second? I like that train of thought, and let us get into it, but let's get into it with the broader panelists. I'm also conscious of time because we have a tight schedule to maintain. So maybe I can use this as a pivot to come to you, Amy. You were one of the key architects working with Parimal and his team in terms of drafting a lot of the rules under Article 6, but it's not a monolithic and the only game in town in terms of the PACM. There are other standards, and now you at the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets represent effectively this additional governance framework that really underpins, like as I said in my introduction, the currency that will affect markets, which is integrity. So the question to you is essentially, the CCPs, the core carbon principles, are very quickly and rapidly becoming the global reference for quality. And the question is, how are you seeing CCP alignment influence how projects are validated, verified, and then brought to the market within the broader context? And then the final bit is this interoperability between compliance systems. You got Article 6.4 and the PACM as one standard, essentially. You got Article 6.2, which Parimal was effectively leading us into. And then you've got the private standards. And essentially, all of these different competing standards are providing optionality in a broader market. So over to you. Give us some thoughts.
Thanks, and thanks for the invite to be here. It's really great to be among friends who like to disagree.
I really like that as well.
And I'm the CEO of the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, which manages and oversees the core carbon principles, which are an independent, global, stakeholder-led, not-for-profit public good that is for all the market to come around to build interconnectedness around. And interconnectedness is something we need to look across the market for. I had the pleasure of being Parimal's boss when I worked at the UN. He looks very tired. Parimal, please go back to bed after this. What we're trying to do collectively across the market with Article 6, with the core carbon principles for the independent standards and government standards, is build an interconnected global market that works locally as well. So just to build on what Parimal had started to talk about with 6.2, that's called cooperative approaches. That's where you're hearing this term implementation agreements. As countries who are seeking to use carbon markets to meet their NDC are building out their frameworks, and the core carbon principles are locking into that. And so we're seeing behavior in the market really change because everybody is seeing the pathway towards globally interconnected markets. Inside the PACM, credits will start to be issued and they'll lock into 6.2. Governments will use them for their NDCs. Inside the core carbon principle programs, Gold Standard, Vera, Isometric, and all others in the market who've applied and are in the assessment process, they are issuing credits that countries are picking up and authorizing to go into 6.2 as well. And so that interconnectedness is really changing behaviors. And we at the core carbon principles, this independent, stakeholder-led system, are making sure that governments understand how they can use independent carbon standards, what we used to call the voluntary carbon market, to meet their policy goals as part of their NDC. And you heard in that fantastic speech this morning all the different ways that carbon markets lock into national policy objectives and deliver on domestic policy goals. And Malaysia has obviously got a whole suite of measures that will deliver that line up, right? And what that means is that you have got, in the core carbon principles space, you've got governments co-opting those standards, and that's giving a signal to business and a signal to project developers. And so it's becoming, as you said, the benchmark for how to join up different buy and sell markets and give developers of projects a route to market. And we're seeing price premiums on CCP-labeled credits, corporate procurement requirements saying it must be CCP approved, so the corporate demand market, as it comes back, because the core carbon principles are about integrity and trust and investment. And we're seeing, retirements in those credits. So at the same time, we're seeing governments say, I'm going to endorse the core carbon principles in my tax, in my compliance system, right? So we are creating globally interconnected markets. And that's interoperability. And that creates small pockets of demand and supply that become fungible with each other. And so, as Gemma was talking about the infrastructure to create smooth transactions only work if the asset can be understood as being one group of assets. So that's what the core carbon principles are doing for the market. And in this region in particular, and I can come back to it if you prefer.
Well, maybe let's come back to it in the third act, let's say, of this conversation around the local context. But let's pick up this thread, Amy, around, and coming back to you, Gemma, on the infrastructure piece, right? Within an exchange, the lifeblood of the exchange is liquidity, right? And liquidity is only begat if you actually have trust in the underlying instrument. So carbon as an asset class, and you have confidence, you have direction with regards to the demand and then the supply signals, and the two shall meet effectively on exchange. And then effectively now we have the infrastructure that underpins it. So Gemma, as an infra sort of specialist, I want to come to you and talk to you around the infrastructure. I think you called registries the ledger, and then you called the MRV systems sort of integral to provide us this kind of lens around integrity. How are they becoming more integrated to enable this kind of greater goal of added liquidity and fungibility, as Amy mentioned?
Indeed, thank you, Rene. And I will be building on Amy's points on how important are carbon core principles as well as the underlying infrastructure. So when we talk about integrity and trust, and Rene just said it, it really depends on how well the underlying carbon market infrastructure works, because it's this infrastructure, trading platforms, registries, the way that you verify emission reductions that will determine, or will be one of the key factors to determine whether the governments and the investors have confidence that what is being transacted is real, verified, and unique. So this is where infrastructure comes in. And I'm going to give you 3 practical examples on how digital infrastructure can really boost integrity. The first one is traceability. If we have a robust registry, compliant with Article 6 requirements, what Perumal was saying, issued ITMOS IDs, identifiers, has accounts, authorizations are all accounted for, you can track the full life cycle of a carbon credit, from project registration to issuance to transfer to retirement. And you can see all this data throughout each stage. And if it's connected also to the Article 6 infrastructure and initiatives like the Climate Action Data Trust, you can reconcile data, and this visibility closes information gaps. And these information gaps have been addressed, and therefore, potential perception of double counting is addressed. Investor confidence goes up. Second example is data comparability. If you have digital MRVs and registries across different countries in ASEAN that use the same data model, the same data structure, they talk to each other. It's like talking the same language. So when they talk to each other, you can compare data across countries, across programs, across different institutions. And when you can compare data, you can make audit trails easier, verification better, and quality of data is higher, right? And the third practical example on how we can boost integrity from a bottom-up approach is that, to your question, Rene, these technologies are evolving. We have artificial intelligence, geospatial technologies, remote sensing, and they are all being connected. So we're designing end-to-end digital ecosystems where the geospatial data is ingested in the digital MRV. The digital MRV pushes the data to a registry that accounts these emission reductions, and this is listed in an exchange. And ideally, we integrate all these platforms, and we have in a near real-based time all this information in one place. And this is creating automation, and automation reduces cost. it improves the effectiveness, and therefore less duplication and the due diligence by investors, buyers, and legal authorities, it makes easier. So this is how I see digital infrastructure, no? Building on what Amy and the colleagues said.
Yeah, I really like that. Bjorn, I want to get your input here, right? But let's just kind of contextualize, right? Transparency, common language, right? And then effectively leveraging these tools to create scale. How are we seeing it from the private sector perspective?
Yeah, I think
out?
just one thing to add on, like the
please.
liquidity piece, right? Because I think as much as the infrastructure can help to solve reduce transaction costs, increase price transparency, et cetera, which is critical, there's still this short-term transition from the carbon market of the past to this new era, which is really about the supply and demand mismatch. So the current supply in the market is not what buyers are really looking for. Whether it's voluntary demand, where again, I think we are seeing more and more demand growing for CCP labeled credits, but it's a very short supply from current projects and the assessed and approved methodology.
And we're seeing appreciation across that very small pool of supply right now because more and more demand is coming in, which is a natural
Exactly.
response.
And then the second piece is the compliance demand, right? Which is really, I think, the major piece that is shaping up both in terms of CORSIA, international airlines, as well as for domestic compliance markets that allow for offsets, such as Japan or also South Korea and Singapore.
Here in Malaysia.
Across the region, but there's no or very few authorizations from the host parties. So again, I think when you look at the market now compared to 2021, as the CEO previously highlighted, at that time it was almost only spot. You know that better than anyone, Rene. But right now, if you look at the transactions that at least are being announced, it's almost only forward and offtake agreements. And
but there's still a lag between the forward offtakes, and that's predominantly on the CDR space. There's still quite a lot of thriving spot transactions, as Amy mentioned, and it's showing up in the retirement. But we need vibrant spot, we need vibrant forwards, and we need vibrant derivative markets like futures in order to encourage this flywheel to start to spin. But as you all have highlighted, there are internal sort of blockages or inefficiencies inherent within the system. Can I go back to Parimal? Parimal, to kind of bring you in. There's this, very recently, I think late last week, within the supervisory body, you recently just released the draft standard addressing non-permanence and reversals, effectively covering that risk assessment and buffer pool contributions. The question here is, this new draft tackles this permanence head on, introducing these clearer procedures for reversal risk, but it really does create a very difficult and onerous bar for nature-based solutions to be included. Give us some context around the conversations, and then I'd like to bring it towards this sort of nature-based piece, because there is a very limited time frame here for action, and we are here in the equatorial belt in ASEAN, in Malaysia, where there's huge potential for sequestration for nature-based solutions, but seemingly they're not necessarily being encouraged within the current draft guidelines. And so I'd just like to get your perspectives on that one, please.
No, thanks, Rene. And it was a timely question. And I also have some of the supervisory body members are in Malaysia at this moment. So I'm sure that they would be flooded with a similar question. As you have rightly said, that this standard has provided the firm foundation for addressing the reversal risks. It also tried to balance between what we call as what is immediately needed, what the commercial establishments and private sector is looking for. And then it is also one of the important roles of the UNFCCC Secretariat to make sure, and the supervisory body as an arm that is nominated by parties to the Paris Agreement. So they are not coming from somewhere. They are representatives of 195 countries sitting in the room. And I just wanted to say that they also were trying to balance between what the science tells us. And always we hear that the science tells us about how important the nature-based systems are. It's unequivocally true that the nature-based solution has to be part of the solution in addressing climate change. and when those nature products and nature solutions are being involved with carbon markets, then the principles that needs to be followed by carbon markets and principles are a bit different than what IPCC just says as science. So what supervisory body has tried to make sure is to bring some kind of a practical solutions in and around how long the projects has to store emissions, how long the monitoring should happen. The principle still remains as that in order for, like, I think you are talking about you, Amy, and others, Geman, beyond, all of us are talking about integrity and trust. If the market has to continue to be trustworthy and integral, you also cannot run away from the science that it needs to be managed. So what this particular tool also has provided is that flexibility of the private sector when they are engaging in specific activities to determine the length to which that the reversals or the permanence has to be ensured. And if there is a reversal, the tool also has provided 4 steps and 4 exit strategies in which that they can come out of such long-term monitoring. And the risk of the reversals has to be negligible because we are talking about, you talked about liquidity in the market. If you have to have liquidity, the market should have fungibility in terms of what units come into the market. You cannot have units that come into the market having different levels of labels or fungibility. So you need to maintain that fungibility of those units. And what this standard has tried to address is that, okay, now everything has been given to the project proponents or the methodology developer to determine the right length in which the credits are to be monitored once they have been put into the market. And then it also has provided quite a number of exit strategies, including that of a third-party guarantee after a particular period. And they have re-emphasized insurance. Then the third-party guarantee could be anything. Like if you remember that, I know that we have quite a lot in the press last 2 weeks, as you rightly said, because initially when the standard was done, everything was left under the responsibility of the country, in which if Malaysia is giving an unit for 40 years, 35 years or 20 years, the rest of the period for ensuring that permanence has left with the country as a host country as a liability option. Still, that option is there as a third-party guarantee, but parties have rejected that proposal by explicitly saying that the host country where the activity is implemented would be responsible for all liability. And now this standard also provides the flexibility in order for you to determine the right proportion of how to distribute those liability. And also you have an option to exit from the post-crediting monitoring. So I think that way, I think if rightly being used, I think we are in the right direction, and we are looking forward to receive standards from tropical forests that you actually have mentioned, where the risk of reversals are higher. And I think that will provide a practical solution. And we need, as I said, that there is unequivocally, we need nature-based solutions as part of climate solutions. But we also have to balance the science commercial interest and also making sure that the units that come are fungible.
Thank you. That's a great intervention. I see you guys jostling for space, but maybe I'll come to Amy first. I'd just like to get your comments across two areas, right? Obviously, ICVCM provides the governance framework at sort of programmatic and then methodological basis. I'd love to get your thoughts around methodologies in sort of nature-based space, and then the regional context, and then the third bucket is obviously kind of additional context, wearing your former hat within the UNFCCC, if you want to comment.
Sure, yeah. I mean, so the way the core carbon principles works is that independent standards, government standards that are operating at domestic level or in the market, they have a review from of all their governance principles, and at the methodological level as well. And I'm sure all of you in the room know that the voluntary market understands nature. And
can we agree to refrain from voluntary, because ultimately you're talking about this interoperability. Okay, can we rebrand it as verified?
The independent carbon market understands
Yeah.
and has for a long time worked, learning by doing, in the verified space for nature, and has generated an incredible amount of experience. And when we did the core carbon principles assessment framework, it was a really inclusive stakeholder process, thousands and thousands and thousands of comments on every single rule, which were designed by leading independent experts, right? So really democratic, if I can put it that way. And what we did when we did that process was listen to everyone and came out with a threshold level, a next step signpost. So 40 years of monitoring, management of buffer pools for certain project types, and used specific tools and said, we'll do lots of further work. And we have put out a very readable report on permanence recently, so come to me if you're interested afterwards. And it's really readable. And the reason that matters is that these are really complex issues, as Perimal made clear. And the work we're doing around nature and permanence is a collective journey, right? We understand how buffer pools work. We understand that maybe insurance can be a different approach. We understand that risk pools might be helpful. And we're also looking at trust functions for permanence, right? So we're all on a collective journey, but we really have to all understand that nature is an essential part of that journey. And we can't just set barriers for nature-based products and somewhat for tech products that just cannot be met, right? Because we don't have time to design systems that can't be used. The climate doesn't have time for that. So I think one of the things, and I'll call out Jackie, who's in the audience here from the PACM, who's just on the third row there. So you can ask Jackie also for any of her take. I'll let her do that personally and privately on the work of the PACM. But PACM, UNFCCC has come new to nature. There wasn't much nature in crediting in the past in the UNFCCC, and they're on that collective journey to come into the nature space. And that's so everybody has to go through that process. But we collectively need to then understand what we're doing with nature across all the independent standards and PACM, because we need to give project developers a clear signal of what's good enough in nature, and science is extremely key. That's key to integrity. And actively giving people clear messages about how methodologies work is also really key. So the core carbon principles set out a threshold, and it's a what, not a how, and then the independent standards explain how they meet that. And many project developers will know how that works at very granular detail here in the audience. So if you build that into the interconnectedness story, that means that each domestic system that is looking out to the international markets also needs to understand what the international space is expecting around nature, around risk management, around reversal risk management, around conservativeness, and also around robust quantification, because we know that in the past, that's been difficult, and there's been more doing than learning. And we're now really taking that very focused, really conservative, carefully managed, robust quantification issue and using much more technology. In the past, actually, the reference points were more challenging.
Yep.
We really now have everything
we have all the tools at our disposal.
All the tools we need to make really clear, evidence-based assessments of just how many credits have been achieved. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm just trying to join together.
No, thank you for doing that. That effectively binds it all together. Bjorn, you were keen to...
Can I just comment? Because, I think we were probably one of the most vocal critics of the previous draft of this standard, because we saw the risk, and our members, 300+ member companies globally, saw the risks that this standard would effectively exclude all land-based or nature-based crediting from 6.4 PACM by the requirements that were drafted by the methodological expert panel. So what the supervisory body adopted last Friday is, in essence, an improvement from the previous draft, after receiving thousands of comments from stakeholders like ourselves and many in the audience, highlighting how yeah, how disastrous this would be essentially for crediting from nature. And I think what Perumal highlighted is that there is a very fine balance between what is feasible and
Yes.
what is scientifically durable. And what we have to do now together as a community is, as we move ahead with methodologies for nature-based crediting, maybe in 2026 and 2027, we have to discuss this again and come back to the issues around guarantees, insurance, buffer pools, and this will be a very important conversation to have. We also prepared a brief from AITA on the recent decision, if anyone wants to understand, because I think we don't have time to go into all the technicalities at this panel, so I'll leave it there.
No, thank you. So I noticed, Perumal, you have your hand up. Do you want to comment on this? And then I want to do the quick whistle-stop tour to wrap up, because conscious of time.
No, I really do not want to make it like a nature conversation. Just to respond back, like, yes, as Beyond said, or Amy said, that this also has went through thousands of comments from more than 120 different stakeholders. And the experts who are there, both from the MET expert panel as well as of the supervisory body, has also have the experience in working with these areas, and even FCCC as like where we are seeing most of the activities happening, which might theoretically or potentially where we have seen the 6.2 credits recently, comes from activities that are eligible under RED. And the RED as a system and the National Forest Reference Level that has been underpinning as a baseline for these units are being assessed and reviewed under a separate process as a RED Plus framework. So even FCCC has been working with forestry, not as Amy said, that directly under a carbon markets space. But we are all here together, as she said, in terms of the journey in making sure that nature-based projects, both explicitly or implicitly, not being excluded. And that's nobody, since I haven't called out Jackie's name, and I think Amy has called Jackie's name, I mentioned some SBM members are there. It's not even with an iota of doubt anybody should have in the room that PACM is working towards excluding nature-based projects. And I think that is something we wanted to send, and I'm sure Jackie would be adding probably in private or while she was speaking in other panels, that SBM tried to find the right balance between making sure that the nature-based projects comes in, they are durable, they are fungible, in making sure that nobody questions the integrity in a long term. And we are together, and we are also learning from what's happening. Significant work has been done in the external world, in the independent standard space, as you said, Renee, no longer called as voluntary in the last 15 years. And the growth of the nature-based solutions is being very closely being monitored. And we will be hearing both sides. And you would also be hearing something in COP. And going forward, there are going to be both sides of the voices, and we all together have to make sure that nature features within the carbon market in providing that durability and fungibility. Thanks.
Great. No, Perumal, thank you for that. So I, as we kind of wrap, and we've got sort of 10 minutes or so to do that, I really want to get some interventions from everybody in terms of closing remarks and takeaways. But I just want to kind of summarize something to kind of set the scene here. We're coming at it from different directions, but essentially now there's this convergence effect that's coming into play here. We talked about it from the infrastructure perspective, right? Registries as ledgers, the exchanges as essential nodes for liquidity provision. You've got the integrity across the board, but obviously within the private standards, and then obviously under PACM and under Article 6.2. And Amy keenly pointed out that there are obviously many representatives here from the private standards. So then we've got Vera, Gold Standard, and others in the room as well. And then we've got obviously all of the market participants and different actors, from policymakers through to market participant intermediaries and investors and the like, as well as the demand side for corporates that are represented. And essentially there's this alignment. And thank you, Perumal, for clarifying that, because there may be a perspective from some in the audience that PACM is leaning away from nature-based, but it's not the case, right? And the broader Article 6 under 6.2 2 framework, as he pointed out, certainly creates a big space and opportunity here for nature-based. But it's not just nature-based solutions, although they're important. We have many other levers to pull and to choose from. So within that broader context around sort of convergence and a path forward towards decarbonization in general, I want to ask each one of the panelists, and Jem, I'll start with you because you're my closest, which is, what is the single most important action we need between now and, let's say, COP30 to strengthen this market integrity piece, and even provide us some context looking forward, if you can?
Thank you, Rene. First, maybe I will just provide a quick background on our role in the region, and then I will
please.
go back to this. So in the ASEAN countries, there's, as we've been discussing, the foundation of carbon markets is being built, and the World Bank has a role of enabling and convening in this space. Through the Partnership for Market Implementation, the PMI program, we are supporting more than 35 countries on setting up the national policies, the national strategies, and the infrastructure in place, including ASEAN countries, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, and many others. And on this, we have a World Bank hub in Singapore, where it's the focal point of our work. We're bringing global expertise to the regional priorities and have a growing partnership with the government of Singapore to develop carbon markets across ASEAN, including South Asia and Africa countries. We're also working with the government of Japan, building on their leadership on carbon market cooperation and Article 6 initiatives. And in terms of financing needs, to give you an example, World Bank investment for low carbon development is quite small, but it's important for private sector financing. Similar to the lending operation that we prepared with the 5 billion envelope for accelerating energy access in Southern and Eastern Africa, the bank is preparing now a lending operation of a 2.5 billion envelope for the EAP region on renewable energy and grid extension, which will include initially countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and others. So this is in terms of financing needs and the role here. As a wrap-up, what the key message would be is, what is important is to move from designing to doing. Put your policy in place, put your infra in place, and start testing, even if it's not perfect, because countries learn by doing, and markets mature by iteration and innovation. So this is what I would say as a key message, and pilot, test, and learn fast, and I believe ASEAN is already leading by example on this regard, so thank you.
Jim, I love that. The rubber meeting the road. Amy, your thoughts?
Yeah, let's just riff off doing stuff. Methodologies. I have been listening events and bilaterals for the last 10 days just in this Southeast Asian region. And it's just really clear how many projects there are ready to go if the methodologies are ready for the region. And I went back late last night and picked up the phone to our CCP eligible programs and just made them aware that we all need now to really focus on developing the methodologies for the ASEAN context that work really well and enable the potential that there is for real action. And so for me, one of my big takeaways is doing means making sure that there are really a good number of really regionally appropriate methodologies. And PACAM will start that journey. Our independent standards are working on them revising and upgrading methodologies to meet the CCP standard that gives the access to market, that gives the price premium. And then I think, interconnectedness means that when you have something like the core carbon principles, you can bring methodologies under that double tick process through those programs. And they can be regionally specific, right? You can make methodologies that work exactly for one region. And I really encourage, and I will be encouraging, the eligible programs who are here, the CCP programs who are here, to listen to the developers who are here. And let's just see that. It won't happen before COP, but it should happen before the next COP, because it's not that hard to write a methodology. We know so much more than we used to. So that's something.
And we have stronger tools and systems in place in order to leverage.
The systems.
Yeah.
The governance systems are there with the independent programs, right? That's how they got a CCP label.
Okay.
And I really think meth development is an area where we can really make a lot of progress now.
Great, I like that. Parimal, you said you've got 3 weeks to go. What's the highlight of the sort of the focus for you?
I think in terms of integrity, both like from a Packham side, and I fully subscribe to what Emmy said, that we need to make sure that we have to be agnostic to the technology scale type, and make sure that every single action that is being geared towards climate action get the necessary financial benefit, including through that of the carbon finance. And we need to make sure that the standards that we do to produce are robust enough in making sure that they are having the integrity that's needed in the market. From an Article 6 perspective, like we would be having the second round of reviews happening, not before COP, but immediately after COP, will also tell us how the different actions, and you might have seen already there are 3 big nature-based projects are part of those reviews that are going to be taken up sometime early in December. So we are looking at the new cooperative approaches that have been submitted. That will also provide, because it's all about not judging the cooperation itself, it is about the information and reports that are available to provide what kind of transparency is needed in the market. So I think these review reports you might have already seen for 5 of the bilateral cooperative approaches. The 6th one is expected to be there. That's a nature-based RED Plus project, which is expected to be there before the COP. And then post-COP, we have 9 new corporations are being reviewed. And we as UNFCCC playing the role of the custodian in terms of making sure that the 6.2 reports are transparent enough. I think that will also provide the strength to the market in terms of market integrity. Over to you, Rene.
Great, thank you, Parimal. So Bjorn, I'll let you get the final word and then I'll do my wrap up.
Thank you. So yeah, as mentioned, it's 3 weeks left until COP30. So I think basically what we need to have before COP30 is the new round of NDCs. And ultimately, this is what will then create the ambition and the demand for this market. Because as much as we don't want to talk about voluntary market, actually the ITMO market is a voluntary market because countries set their NDCs as voluntary targets, nationally determined contributions. If they set their targets high, they will need to buy ITMOs potentially to meet their targets. If they set them low, they may have an oversupply and may be able to sell and trade ITMOs. So the role of these NDCs before COP30 will be absolutely critical. And I think, again, coming back to implementation, we have seen more than, I think, 100 probably cooperative approaches under Article 6.2 signed now, but less than 100,000 tons transacted as ITMOs and reported to the UNFCCC. So again, we really need this market to scale up in terms of real volumes being transacted to scale and deliver the ambition we need. Thank you.
I really like that. So in terms of wrapping up, what we have disparate themes, but effectively all converging on one point, which is action, right? The time for talk, the time for planning and kind of the building is, I think, over. Now it's time for actual execution. And we're seeing all of these really positive signs coming to place. Absolutely, I think it's that challenge, Bjorn, which is really resonant with regards to what I'm hearing from you, is certainly taken. But Article 6 really provides the geopolitical backbone of the carbon markets across PACM 6.2, which is the implementation, and then you've got the international standards that are then interoperable. What I'd like to see, to Gemma's point, is this interoperability and common language across the different systems so that we don't get silos. And then those very sort of pools of liquidity that will emerge on exchanges like BCX will then interconnect with other markets, and we can have a global trading marketplace where we have government actors, private sector actors, all trading and providing capital and financial flows to where the impact can actually be made. So thank you very much for the time. Really appreciate everybody's attention, and thank you to our expert panelists for their interventions. Thank you.